Howdy friends, this is PelicanMan bringing you another Death and Taxes video. I know it's been a little while between recordings. That is because I actually stopped playing Modern for a good time because the One Ring made the format kind of not fun and there was no real reason to commit to it. I'm sure a lot of you know, if you're Modern players, you either experience it yourself or you saw it a lot where the play in Modern dropped a significant amount during the One Ring's time. So now that the bans have happened, we've gotten rid of the One Ring, Gigantha and Interrupter, and we've gained Mox Opal, Faithless Looting, Splinter Twin and Green Sun Zenith. The format is exciting, Death and Taxes is exciting once again. As most of you know if you watch my content, I play a lot of mono white Death and Taxes. I play it a lot in paper, play it online, make videos on it. So this is something a little new for me where I'm actually splashing a color. This might be the first time I've ever done this on the channel. So we are splashing black in Death and Taxes, which this deck's been called a lot of things. It's been called Orzhov Scam, it's been called Black-White Mid-Range, it's been called Dead Guy Ale. If you're a Taxes player and a Taxes fan, you know this is a Death and Taxes deck, but it does have flavors of those other things. So let's get into it. Why are we splashing black mana? The number one reason we could just have a tiny splash and just run this one card is Overlord of the Balemurk. So Overlord of the Balemurk's a 5 mana 5/5 that on each of your attack, it mills 4 cards and then you return a non-avatar creature card or a planeswalker card from your graveyard to your hand. So there's any of the creatures in the deck except for extra copies of Overlord of the Balemurk, which 5 mana is a lot. We do get Vial up to 5 sometimes to Vial and Solitude, but really the impending is the real trick here. So for 1 and a black, we put it into play as an enchantment, and then 5 turns later it becomes a creature. That's pretty slow, especially for Modern, but if we can flicker it with Phelia or Flickerwisp, then when it enters, it doesn't remember the impending stuff. It just comes in as the creature that it was always meant to be. So what this means is that this is now probably the strongest card in our deck. It's the best thing to flicker. It is the best complementary piece for all the cards we already wanted to run. So if some of the lines are turn 2 Phelia, turn 3 Impending Overlord, attack with Phelia, blink Overlord, and you get 2 Overlord triggers straight away, and the 5/5 comes into play. This is, in my mind, what we're doing now instead of going turn 2 Stoneforge Mystic, tutor Kaldra, turn 3 activate Stoneforge Mystic, put Kaldra in. You know, this is our Kaldra now. The other line is turn 2 Impending Overlord, turn 3 cast Flickerwisp, flicker the Overlord. Same thing, we're getting the Overlord to flicker back into play and become a creature, so it gets to start attacking with it from turn 4 onwards. So the rest of the deck we've got around it, let's look at the mono white core. We've still got 4 Ephemerates, which I think a lot of my other videos was on 3, which is something I definitely defended in mono white. With this build, I like 4. Same with the Recruiter. These were 3 of. Now we love 4. The format's allowed to be mid-range, it's allowed to be slower, and we're going to grind our opponents into the dust. We've got 4 Phelia as always. We've got 3 Flickerwisp. This could be 4. We are trimming down to 3 because this is where we need to make the room. We've got 4 Solitudes. We've got the 1/1 split of Aven Interrupter and Skyclave Apparition. I like these as tutor targets with Recruiter of the Guard, that if there is a threat in play we need to deal with, we can tutor for Skyclave, and if there is a threat that we expect to come in future turns that we want to deal with, the Aven Interrupter is kind of that insurance for the future. So insurance for the present and insurance for the future. Skyclave also, like, Solitude is answering a lot of the threats we want to deal with, but Skyclave is a really nice one-off catch-all in the main deck, just for, like, you know, if you're versing Ruby Storm and they play a Ruby Medallion, you know, there's just lots of random non-creature permanents that you might want to deal with, and Skyclave's really helpful there. We have 3 White Orchid Phantom, with the 4th one sitting in the sideboard. We still like this guy to ramp us with Flagstones of Trokair, and there are enough matchups where we get to punish, especially, you know, the value with Phelia, Flickering Phantom, and blowing up a lot of lands. The Phantom is still really nice. It's a good body, good effect. It works on ourselves even if our opponents aren't necessarily vulnerable to it, and these are kind of flex slots, and I like running these here because if you don't run them here, you kind of want them in the sideboard at least, which is why I only found room for 3 in the main, but the 4th one is chilling in the sideboard. And then let's look at the black cards we're splashing. So Fatal Push is a nice support to Solitude where we get this nice removal package main deck. Otherwise, we'd probably be running Path to Exile on the sideboard like I often do with my mono white lists. Fatal Push is just a much cleaner removal spell. Really nice to have access to. And 3 Emperor of Bones. So this is a 2 mana 2/2 that on each of your beginning of combats will exile a card from the graveyard, either yours or your opponent's. And for 1 and a black, you can adapt 2. So it's got no counters. You've got 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and return something that's exiled with it to the battlefield with a finality counter and haste, so it's sacrificed at the next end step. So this is another card that ties our package together. You know, we love Overlord. It's the reason I splash black. This is honestly like a close second reason. This is one of my favorite cards in the new build of the deck. So, you know, we mill over cards with Overlord, we get to rebuy them with Emperor. We, you know, if an Overlord gets milled, we can recur it with Emperor. We can pitch cast Solitude and then recur it with Emperor. We can recur Phelia, attack deck with Phelia, Blink the Overlord. We can flicker our Emperor with Ephemerate, Phelia, and Flickerwisp to reset counter. We can use those same things on whatever we recur with Emperor, so it loses the finality counter and gets to stick around. There's a lot of utility with Emperor, not to mention the fact that it's main deck graveyard hate, and if our opponent's a reanimator deck, we get to use this ability to put a creature from their graveyard into play. So a Grizzlebrand, an Atraxa, an Ulamog, you know, if our opponent's trying to reanimate a big creature, we can try and reanimate that creature. And then obviously we've got our 4 trusty Aether Vials, and then let's talk about the mana base, because these guys are part of the mana base. So I've gone for a very bare bones black-white mana base. There are a lot of lists that are running higher fetch land counts, and I think that's probably correct. I'm trying to stress test the mana base and kind of see where we can get with it. So real quick, I got 4 of the fast land, 4 of the fetch land, 1 shock, 1 surveil land, 1 canopy land to draw a card with, 1 swamp, 3 plains for 4 basics, and then 3 MDFCs, 2 white, 1 black. So Witch Enchanter obviously still really good with Flickerwisp, getting to flicker it and get a disenchant effects. You play it as a land, you flicker the land, you know, and then it's just a 4 mana disenchant. You get to flicker with Ephemerate, Phelia, Flickerwisp, and just keep blowing up your opponent's artifacts and enchantments. Really good in this current meta. I actually would like to try and find more room for more copies, but it's too painful to run more. You can get away with a third, but the Boggart Trawler is main deck graveyard hate, which is really nice. Again, we can play it as a land and then flicker it with Flickerwisp so it enters as a creature and get the ability. Just really nice that it's main deck graveyard hate. And then lastly in the meta base, we've got 4 Flagstones of Trokair. This is to work with our White Orchid Phantom, and this is something that a lot of other lists aren't doing, and I don't fault them for it, especially if your Phantoms are in the board 100%. You don't need the Flagstones. It's something I like, and again, I'm stress testing it, so I want to see if the Flagstones, if they make our black mana too unreliable, where a Flagstones isn't a black source until you find a Phantom, and even then it's black source a turn later. You know, you need double black to make Emperor of Bones work. And then the other thing in the mana base that's the questionable part is the 4 fast land. A lot of lists are on 2 fast land. The issue with the fast land is obviously that it kills a lot of your turn 4 and turn 5 plays, where if you're going turn 4 Flickerwisp plus Ephemerate, or, you know, Recruiter and Ephemerate, or holding a Fatal Push, or play Emperor, adapt Emperor immediately to attack with a creature that turn. If you turn 5 are trying to hit a land off the top to cast Overlord or Solitude for their full retail. So that is definitely a weakness of the deck, and it is something I'm testing to see how bad it is, because this deck has so much card advantage that a lot of the time I feel like you aren't going to get stuck in those situations where you need to that 5th land because you need to cast Overlord on turn 5. You know, I feel like, oh, I've drawn a tap land, I'll play the tap land, I'll have my turn doing the other stuff, and then on turn 6 I'll play the Overlord. You know, I want to see how punishing that is. So that's the main deck. Let's look at the sideboard now. So again, as I said before, we've got the 4th White Orchid Phantom in the sideboard. We have 2 more copies of Aven Interrupter. This is to fight a lot of the X spells, so we'll talk about some of the unbanned cards here. So Green Sunset got unbanned, and then there's other X spells like Kozilek's Command or Indomitable Creativity. If you plot an X spell, when your opponent casts it from plot, X has to be 0. Unless, you know, if it's part of the cost, you know, X, white, or whatever, they can't pay into that X. They're not paying the mana cost of the card, so it turns off a lot of those cards. So very powerful in those matchups. Also good in kind of grindier matchups like the Frog matchup, where they're going to try and counterspell. You plot a counterspell, now that is a dead card that they can never use from plot. So really like the Avens, just a nice catch-all. The main deck one is just a tutable copy. These are for when we actually need it. We bought up to 3 copies. 3 Wrath of the Skies. This was technology we added to the mono white lists for the energy decks. And now with the Mox Opal unbanned, the affinity decks are kind of scary. So Wrath of the Skies helps mop up a lot of their little artifacts. Similar with Kataki. Kataki is going to punish those Mox Opal decks too. And it's a nice one-of that's shootable with Recruiter. And then 2 Stony Silence. So the affinity decks are going to run a lot of artifact lands. So Stony Silence also turns off their lands. Very nice there. This is the flexible slot in the side. So the big downside of Stony and Death and Tax has always been 2 things: Aether Vial and Stoneforge Mystic. So I'm not on Stoneforge Mystic, so I don't mind. I'm not turning off any equipments, but you are turning off the 4 copies of Aether Vial. The reason that I'm happy to test Stony in this list is because when you're boarding it in, you're boarding in generally 3 Wrath of the Skies, 2 Stony, 1 Kataki. So I'm fine cutting the 4 Aether Vials there. And again, this deck's being called Dead Guy Ale by some people, and that's where it starts looking like that, or like a black-white mid-range or a black-white scam. Vial is kind of the card holding together the Death and Taxes identity for the most part. So post-board, we do become more of a control-y black-white mid-range deck in those matches, so we can trim the 4 Aether Vial to add all these cards in, and then Stony has no downside for us. So that's great. And then, again, Faithless Looting was another card that got unbanned, so we want some graveyard hate. So Surgical Extraction, very, very powerful. Faithless Looting lets graveyard decks be very, very fast. Surgical is a way to combat that. We've got a slow answer main deck that's just a very powerful card in Emperor Bones, but post-board, we get to bring this fast graveyard interaction. Really, really strong. Love Surgical. Even in mono white, we would be considering this because Faithless Looting has made graveyard decks so strong. And the other graveyard hate spell is Fairy Macabre. So my opinion of the deck, currently having tested the amount of it they have, which isn't as much as some other people, but if we had a one card sideboard, this would be the one card I would be leaning to currently. It just gets you so much value. You discard it, exile 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard, then you impending an Overlord, you get it back with the Overlord trigger, you attack with a Failure, you blink the Overlord comes back, you get it back again. You know, that's only 6 cards in one turn. It is a really, really good way to churn through your opponent's graveyard. Very, very strong, very, very fun. And then lastly, because we have black mana, so if we were mono white, we could still run the fairies and surgicals, but the black mana also gives us access to Thoughtseize, which is going to be great post-board against combo decks. It's slowing them down. Again, we're turning into a control deck post-board. Like, we're going to slow right down, play some hate bears that are going to slowly kill our opponent, or maybe quickly kill our opponent, depending what kind of a combo matchup it is and how egregious it is. But Thoughtseize is going to be the card that picks apart their hand to give us time to get all that done. So this is the deck list. With that said, let's get into a league and see how we go. Number 1, game 1, we're on the draw against black-white Necrodominance. We've kept a good hand that turn 1 we can have the option of Fatal Push or Surveil, turn 2 Overlord, turn 3 Recruiter. There's definitely a really good curve. Our opponent leads Ocelot Pride, so that just eats a Fatal Push straight up. And they follow up with Charming Prince, which initially felt very confusing because I don't know what archetype this is by Ocelot Pride and Charming Prince. It seemed like it could have been energy, but the Charming Prince throws it off. And then the Necrodominance comes out, so that kind of tells us what our opponent's on. We got back to Solitude with the Overlord, so seeing the Ocelot Pride, it feels like this should be a good card to have access to. And here with the Necrodom we play the Recruiter, and we choose to get Flickerwisp because we can play the Witch Enchanter as a land and then flicker it with Flickerwisp if we need to blow up the Necrodominance. And our opponent casts Sauron and passes back without doing too much else. They've got themselves really low here. They're down to 9 already. So here, instead of Flickerwisp being the Witch Bless Meadow, I feel like Emperor of Bones, get back Phelia, attack to blink the Overlord, if it pays off, is going to be a really good way to finish off our opponents on such a low life total. They do have to remove it for the Emperor of Bones, so that's the punish for that play. But we do still have Pitchcast Solitude available, and the Overlord's ticking down and will eventually become a creature on its own. Alright, our opponent has a main deck trade which I have to deal with our Overlord, which is a little annoying. So in response, I'm just going to Solitude this Sauron. I'm sick of it gaining life, and I really don't want it to flip into a Planeswalker. Our opponent's all the way down to 6 now. Here's a Concealed Courtyard, which being a tap land doesn't really matter since we pitched the White Orchid Phantom, so we don't have a 2-drop anyway. So just playing out Recruiter, tutoring a Solitude, and our opponent just has a follow-up Ocelot Pride and another land, and they put themselves to 4. So not scared of the Ocelot Pride because we have Hardcast Solitude available now, and we just Solitude it now so we can get in with the Recruiter. This is so we can hopefully get our opponent a bit lower and make the Necrodominance less good, but they do have a Bowmaster to take out the Recruiter and a Thrapen Charm to take out the Solitude. They follow up with a Guide of Souls, which isn't too scary because we have another Solitude hanging out in our hand, and our opponent goes down to 3. So they're at a point now where even if we Solitude them, the Necrodominance is just meaning they shouldn't really get any more cards for the rest of the game. So we have the option here for double Flickerwisp or single Flickerwisp plus Pitch Solitude, or just Hardcast Solitude, and Hardcast Solitude just feels like the strongest line by far. We could also Wisp the Witch Bless Meadow, but we don't really want to blow up the Necrodominance here because, like I said, our opponent's just never drawing a card for the rest of the game now, I don't think. So our opponent attacks with the Charming Prince. I'm Solituding the Guide of Souls because it's the one that's going to gain them life to get them back in the game, and trade the Charming Prince. Our opponent draws back to 5, and here again we could double Flickerwisp. I think a single Flickerwisp holding up Ephemerate is just going to keep our opponent out of this game and keep us from dying because our life total's got pretty low. So Flickerwisp kills the Orc army pretty freely, and because the Orc army left, our opponent's Fatal Push has a Revolt active, but our Ephemerate is going to take away our opponent's Boggart Trawler, get rid of one of their attackers. We can trade with the Bowmasters here, or just take it and attack them for 3 in the air. The following turn, opponent does have an Ocelot Pride. We Surveil, put Failure in the bin because we're looking for something a bit more relevant here, but our opponent's Boggart Trawler comes back, and here they go down to a 1 to draw back up to 5 with Necrodom to try and see if they have an ounce this Flickerwisp killing them in the sky, and they don't. So we win game number 1. Let's go into sideboard. Alright, so sideboarding against the black-white Necrodominance deck, we want to bring in the Thoughtseize just because it's kind of a fair matchup where if we can hit the Necrodominance out of their hand, we're going to gain so much value from it. That is just a card that is going to be very impactful in the matchup. We're bringing in 3 Wrath Disguise because we saw Ocelot Pride, so we are scared of that early combo, that kind of energy early start. And we're bringing in 2 Aven Interrupter, just kind of insurance. Again, if we can like Aven Interrupter a Necro or like a Sheoldred or something, that's kind of what we're looking for. We're cutting 3 White Orchid Phantoms. I assume their mana base is strong enough to survive it, and I'm looking to ramp myself in this matchup for Aether Vial because we're bringing the Wrath of the Skies, and we don't really need to speed stuff out. We're happy to slow down and just play a very fair game and just trade 1 for 1 over their opponent. So this is a card that's a bad top deck, so happy to cut it, especially because it gets blown up by our Wrath. And 1 Phelia. They're going to have enough removal that Phelia is not really going to stick around too much. We still like having access to it for if our opponent taps out. We, get to get value off our Overlords and stuff, but the 4 copies is just going to give us bad top decks in such a matchup that's going to be pretty removal heavy from their side. So for game number 2, we're on the draw again, and we keep a hand that's slower. We have Wrath of the Skies to clear up any Ocelot Pride, Guide of Soul shenanigans, which our opponent is leading Ocelot Pride. We've got the turn 2 Phelia to flash in. We've got a good curve and a good controlling hand, so pretty reasonable keep. And our opponent follows up the Ocelot Pride with the Sorin. We Surveil, keep an Overlord on top. So now our plan, as expected, now that we have kind of the combo of the deck, we're going to flash in Phelia, untap, jam Overlord, and see what happens. Now, our opponent had no plays. If they could have played something, they could have flipped their Sorin by extorting, but it appears they didn't. So we flash in Phelia, and our opponent does have a Fatal Push and extorts, killing Phelia. And now they've only got 3 cards in hand, and Ocelot Pride is majority of their board, so rather than playing Overlord the Balemurk, I am going to take a turn off to just Wrath the Skies to clear up the Ocelot Pride and all the tokens. They still have Sorin, but I do have the Solitude to deal with it if I need to. Also worth noting, in our hand we can impending the Overlord and then Flickerwisp at the following turn. Now our opponent's just sitting back on Sorin, so I'm kind of happy to just hold up Aven Interrupter. My main thought being that I just want to make sure that Necrodominance doesn't resolve. I don't have any way to deal with the Necrodominance currently, so held up Aven Interrupter. Our opponent had Thoughtseize and might as well throw the Aven Interrupter out at that just to get it in play. And here I'm pitching the Flickerwisp to get rid of the Sorin because our opponent has 2 cards in hand and now nothing going on in play. And next turn they're going to be able to cast the Thoughtseize from plot, and my hand should basically be empty. So the Emperor Bones was a really good draw. We could have potentially done something with that. Like if we had 6 mana, we could have some cool plays. Instead, I'm just going to hardcast the Overlord, rebuy the Solitude, make our opponent scared of a pitch cast Solitude, and just start getting in. Our opponent's got 2 cards in hand and a Thoughtseize on plot. If they Thoughtseize, they can take whatever they take, I can just get it back anyway. And our opponent apparently has nothing relevant going because they scoop it up there. So that is match number 1 in the bag, 2-0 against Black-White Necro. Let's get on to match number 2. Okay, match number 2, we're on the play against Hollow One. We keep a 7, it's got the Failure to Balemurk plan. We could have let a White Toss here, which would give us the option of Phantom, turn 2 Blopper, and Flagstones, but because I had the combo, I was happy to just go for that. And our opponent just starts with a Burning Inquiry, which we keep for Balemurk, and we keep 2 failures, so just play a land, pass back. Burning Inquiry, I choose not to flash in Failure in response to that because I had 2, and I was pretty confident I was going to get to keep 1, and I just didn't want for them to be able to Fatal Push or Lightning Bolt with the open mana. Burning Inquiry again, Failure in response, and now gets untapped with Failure. I didn't get to keep either of the Overlord or the Balemurks, but I did get Recruiter of the Guard, so this is the normal taxes combo of Failure to Recruiter. Pick up a Solitude, flick a Recruiter, and here we pick up a Flickerwisp. This lets us kind of just keep going on with all the shenanigans. Plus, because we played the Boggart Trawler as a land, Flickerwisp is going to get to flicker the land and exile their whole graveyard that they've just spent the first 2 turns filling up. So they have the Bowmasters to kill the Flickerwisp. I do play a Witchblessed Meadow to play out the Aether Vial just to get some value out of it hopefully later on, see if I can do some shenanigans. I do have a Recruiter, so getting to have access to Vial with Recruiter is really nice. And here they have a Bowmaster. I've got a bunch of X1s, which isn't great, never a great feeling, but they're basically empty-handed, and I've got a full grip of really, really good cards. They have the Nethergoyf with a single landed bin, so not really scared of that either. I would probably even be happy to trade Boggart Trawler for it. Here, I flash in Failure End Step, and if they don't have removal, this is just going to take the game away with all the value it's going to provide. Here, Failure's going to attack and blink the Recruiter. We do have another Recruiter in hand, which we could have played out pre-combat. We chose not to. Our opponent blocks with the Nethergoyf, and then cycles a Hollow One to grow it so that it can eat Failure. We Solitude. Failure's going to take this game away with all the card advantage, so more than happy to pitch cast a Solitude. And it feels like from here on out, we're just going to win with crazy, crazy card advantage. I get the Aven Interrupter here as kind of the best insurance, no matter what they might have in their deck, what they might draw, nothing's getting through the Aven. So our opponent scoops it up there. Let's go to sideboarding. Okay, so sideboarding against Hollow One. We want to bring in the Surgicals to remove their keycards from their graveyard. Things like Detective Phoenix and stuff. Surgical just seems pretty good here. Not as crazy because they're not a combo deck, but good enough. Very Macabre. This is a good card I want in this matchup. Just pulling out as many cards of their graveyard as possible. Seems very cool. And 2 Aven Interrupter, just as kind of insurance, same as we did against the Necro deck, where we just kind of want a card to kind of close out the late game and just make sure they're not going to play a sweeper or something like that. And we are trimming a Vial because it's such a grindy, fair matchup. We just don't want bad top decks, so we still like having 3 Vial to cheat stuff in, but the 4th one we're happy to trim. Failure, it's a removal heavy matchup, so Failure is not often going to live too long, so we don't need to rely on it as much. And 3 White Orchid Phantoms, because their mana base seems relatively safe from that. Okay, game number 2, we're on the draw, and we keep a hand that's got really good graveyard control with 2 Emperor Bones and a Fairy Macabre, and our opponent's leading with the tap lane and Mishra's Bauble, so the longer this game goes, the better it is for us, so kind of happy with that. And here, the deck doesn't have a lot of turn 1 plays, it's kind of Aether Vial, Fatal Push, or Surveil Land. So here, we're just going to play the fetch land and get our Surveil Land and kind of just get the card advantage early, just try and tidy up our play a little bit. And we put Witch Enchanter in the bin, which is, if we need it, we have Emperor Bones. We draw Phelia, which is perfect. If they have removal, obviously Phelia's not going to be great, but our opponent's doing nothing, we're happy to do nothing and just throw this Phelia and see what happens. Especially when they just tap out to attack for 2 with the Detective Phoenix. We have the Witch Enchanter in the bin, we have Emperor Bones that'll be able to recur it later. Great, more than happy with that. So here, same as game 1, Phelia and Recruiter are just going to play so nicely together. Getting Solitude, getting Skyclave Apparition. This is a great removal spell for all their threats. All their threats are such low cost that even if Skyclave dies, the token they're getting off, it's not going to be great. And here they're still just chipping in for incremental damage, but not really doing much else. It seems like they've probably got a lot of removal or interaction for us, which we're a control deck, so their interaction doesn't really matter. I play the Emperor of Bones, and I do take the Witch Enchanter, so I can deal with this Detective Phoenix if I need to. But the key thing is I'm not going to activate it here. If our opponent has removal, and I activate and they remove the Emperor Bones in response, that's going to be pretty bad for us. Instead, we're going to play it the opposite way, where if they remove, I'll try and activate in response. And they just have a Darcy to follow up, which is not a card I'm scared of with all the grave hate I've got access to. Here, I'm going to activate Emperor Bones. I shouldn't have played a land first because Concealed Courtyard as a tap land might have been necessary. But here, if they had have interacted and tried to kill the Emperor Bones, I could have activated again in response. So get the Witch Enchanter, kill the Detective Phoenix, and then Emperor Bones eats the Detective Phoenix, so it's not going to be able to come back from the graveyard and give something else flying in haste. And the Emperor Bones is now a 4/4, which is a super relevant threat, and it's going to be hard for them to deal with. They need Fatal Push and not like a burn spell. And so the reason I played untapped land was so I'd have Aven Interrupter up. Now, Emperor Bones is just going to keep their graveyard from ever letting the Darcy have Delirium. I'm just going to keep attacking for 4 and basically doing literally nothing else. I'm holding up Solitude, holding up Aven Interrupter, holding up Fairy Macabre. They did kill the Emperor Bones, so I decided to Skyclave their Dragon's Rage Channeler, which lets me still hold up Aven Interrupter. Not holding up Solitude, but there's nothing I'm really scared of since, you know, worst case I could pitch cast Solitude or use Fairy Macabre to get rid of the Detective's Phoenix so they can't use that to haste something. They already have the Arena of Glory. I'm really kind of happy to just chill here and just play it by ear. Surgical's another great draw that just makes their graveyard super relevant. So the beginning of combat stop for Emperor Bones is really important here. So if you play this on Moto, the beginning of combat stop is important. So beginning of combat happened, Emperor Bones triggered. Before we moved to attacks, I got to activate it, get Failure into play, blink to recruit it for some value. Match number 3, we're on the play against Creativity. This is a very medium 5 lander, so we mulled 6, we keep, and we bottom the 3rd land because we're having Shadowy Backstreet will find us an extra land. We can bin the Emperor Bones because Overlord can get it back if we need it. And our entire plan here is just set up Phelia and Balemurk and see what happens. Our opponent has the turn 2 Ren and 6, which honestly kind of happy for them to tap out for something so to make sure that Phelia lives. And we just flash in Phelia. Here's Overlord. We get to hold up Fatal Push. It's not going to be relevant, but rebuy a Skyclave Apparition, which can threaten to deal with the Ren and 6, attack Phelia, blink the Overlord. We've got Solitude in hand as well, so Skyclave fans with potentially pitchable cards to that. Here we're going to get back Emperor Bones. We did mill over another Overlord, so worst case we can play Emperor Bones and immediately use it to recur the Emperor Bones if our opponent, the Overlord, the Balemurk, if our opponent deals with the first one. They Thoughtseize, took a Solitude, which doesn't matter. I'm going to attack with Overlord and get it back anyway, so here we're going to start going after their lands. I choose to go up to the black source because I'm worried about Fatal Push and Thoughtseize more than their green spells. So I attack Overlord, gets back to Solitude. Phelia's attacking Ren and 6 because I want to make sure to take it down. And our opponent uses Paw Patch formation to deal with the Overlord, which makes sense, very good. But I don't know why they let me get the attack trigger and get my Solitude back. So the Phelia attack, flickered the Phantom, took out the Stomping Ground, and now they have to deal with Phelia and or Phantom because they're just going to win the game by themselves. They do manage to deal with both. They only have a single basic, so yeah, Phantom is just strip mine. So we draw the Witch Enchanter, which lets us play the Emperor Bones that we got earlier, get back the Overlord, attack with it, rebuy the Phantom, and get another Emperor of Bones. So I could have just gotten back a Phantom and blown up a land, but this is playing for the longer game, where our opponent's not going to be able to do too much on 3 mana that's that scary. Like, I don't need to keep them on 2 mana, I don't think. And this Emperor of Bones is just going to be lethal as well. So our opponent scoops it up there. Let's go on to sideboarding. Sideboarding against Creativity. I wanted to bring in Thoughtseize to, you know, pull Creativity out of their hand or disrupt their setup. Surgical Extraction. So So combo's nice for Thoughtseize. If we can Thoughtseize a creativity, we can surgical them away. Also, just in case they have persist or something, because I don't know their deck list fully, if they try and persist one of their fatties, we can surgical it there. Fairies coming in for similar reasons. Also, these two cards just get to fight Ren and 6 to a degree. Two Aven Interrupters, as I mentioned in the deck tech, really good against X spells, creativity being one. Creativity, X needs to be greater than 0 because it needs to target stuff to turn it into other stuff. So if X is 0, it doesn't do anything ever. So plotting one with an Aven just kills the card entirely. Very good. And they have one basic. So White Orchid Phantom is actually going to be our best disruptive tool, that if we can resolve some phantoms and start flickering them, our opponent's going to run out of lands very quick. And they don't have a lot of creatures, so I've chosen to cut all the Solitudes and all the pushes. I think this might have been incorrect. You can leave in some Solitudes just like an instant speed way to disrupt creativity, like getting rid of a goblin or whatever. Also, just like having one as a tutor target with Recruiter could be an option. We trimmed an Aether Vial. They do have like Prismatic Ending, Leyline Binding, so these are weaker and again, grindy matchups. So we are, or not a grindy matchup, but you know, an attrition matchup. So top decking these is pretty bad, and we don't really need them to get through the early game too much. And trimming a Phelia because they are relatively removal heavy, so she isn't likely to stick around and get repeated value. So that's our sideboarding. Let's go to game number 2. Okay, game number 2. Our opponent mulls to 5 here. We keep a strong 7. It's got Phantom, Ephemerate, Thoughtseize. Very, very cool. Our opponent leads Thoughtseize, which kind of has to take the Phantom. So now they're on 3 cards, and I just get to Thoughtseize them back. Take a Fatal Push, leave them with creativity, because I feel like I can fight through the creativity, especially with them on so few cards. And I'm just going to jam Recruiter of the Guard, get Emperor of Bones, because our game plan's kind of to get back the White Orchid Phantom and start denying the mana, because then they should never be able to creativity this game. They do land a Fable, so they're starting to look like they're almost back in the game. Here I choose to hold up Aven Interrupter, just in case my opponent has removal or anything. The Emperor of Bones Phantom plays a little scarier. Plus, if I wait till next turn, I can Ephemerate as well. And the Interrupter means they can't go for creativity this turn. So I also just get to flush and Phelia because they did nothing. And now that's going to be especially threatening with the White Orc Phantom that we can put into play. But because of our opponent's treasure tokens, we actually can't keep them off creativity. And we know they have creativity in hand because we left there. So I'm going to keep holding up Aven Interrupter because, as I said in the deck tech, it is insane against creativity because it makes the creativity completely irrelevant. It gets put in plot and they can never actually utilize it once it's in plot. I feel like we put our opponent in a tough spot here where they kind of have to go for creativity now, because if they do Aven Interrupter, if they don't, then end step I can activate this to put this in play and Ephemerate it if I want to, or I can untap and hold up double activation like I did one of the previous matches. So our opponent goes for the creativity here. We slam the Aven, and now the Ephemerate is essentially another copy of Aven for a future creativity. I can Ephemerate the Aven to counter the next creativity, so I am just going to put into play the White Orc Phantom I drew, activate Emperor, put that White Orc Phantom into play, and we get to attack the Failure and blink a Phantom. So I have choices here. I could blink the Phantom that I brought back with the Emperor Bones, which would remove the finality counter. I choose to just get in for the biggest damage possible because this is lethal, so they do have to chump block here. And this way, I still get back a White Orc Phantom and step and block a land, but I don't really need to keep the extra body in play because they are on super lethal, right? And even if they do manage creativity, this is going to take so many resources because they'll need to use treasure tokens as mana in order to cast creativity. And so they attack with the Goblin. I eat it with the Phantom because Phantom has first strike, and my opponent does have the creativity. Ephemerate on the Aven. Again, plotting the double creativity makes it completely useless, so our opponent scoops it up. And that is match number 3 in the bag. Let's get on to match number 4. Match number 4, we are on the play against Dimir Frog. I choose to keep based on the potential strength of Overlord. I don't have anything that works with it yet, but I do have the Overlord, so... And the Emperor Bones is a nice support card for Overlord. Like, I get a curve of Impending Overlord into Recruiter, into Emperor Bones and activation. And here, Overlord does its job and finds a Solitude, as we always want it to do. And it looks like we're versing Dimir Frog, so especially nice to have access to Solitude here. We actually have Solitude Scam available now, which is really nice. And we did draw the Failure, so we also have the option here of, in our opponent's end step, flashing in Failure and be able to Ephemerate to protect the Failure, so that Failure can then flicker the Overlord of the Balemurk. Our opponent's just playing the control game. They are doing nothing and just counterspelling, which is fine. Our Balemurk will tick down on its own here. But here's the nice thing about Emperor Bones. We will get the Failure back, activate Emperor, attack, Failure will blink the Balemurk, and we'll just drain our opponent a card advantage, so they scoop it up. Let's move on to sideboarding against Dimir Frog. Sideboarding against Dimir Frog, I choose to bring in Thoughtseizers. This is mostly to take a peek at their hand, see what they're working with, maybe pick apart some counterspells or removal to try and get our stuff through. Fairy Macabre, this is really good against their Unearthed Staff, good against Oculus, keeping their cards out of their bin. 2 Surgicals, again, really good against Unearth, good answer to Unearth. You know, if we can remove like all their Oculuses from their deck, they're going to not have many threats to actually close the game with. And there's also an option, you know, surgical there, fatal pushes or counter spells. That's something you really want to do. It's tough to know when you actually want to do that, but it's an option. And 2 Aven Interrupters, just because it's a control matchup, just plotting their counter spells and hope to get stuff to stick. If the game gets on long enough, these can be pretty valuable. So sideboarding out the White Orchid Phantoms, they don't have a lot of utility in the matchup. They're just going to be 2/2 flying first strikers, which just chump block Psychic Frog really. 2 Flickerwisp. Flickerwisp is good at flickering Psychic Frog, but otherwise it's like chump blocking Frog and Oculus really. And we're not trying to flicker anything of ours for too much value in the matchup. And then I trimmed a copy of Ephemerate, Phelia, and Aether Vial. So these are all cards I'm relatively happy to trim just generally. So I've chosen to trim one of each just because I couldn't really work out what to do. So this is what I'm running with. Game number 2 on the draw. This is a 1-lander, but we have Aether Vial, and Aether Vial is really strong in this matchup. And a lands Black Soul also lets us cast Fatal Push. So not the best keep if our opponent like has a Force Engagement for Aether Vial, but Force Engagement really generally doesn't feel good against us anyway, so kind of okay to run that risk. Drawing the Swamp was also nice. It gave us a second land. Unfortunately, we don't have any white sources yet, especially with some double white spells in hand, but that's what the Vial's for. We are just going to Impending an Overlord and rebuy a Witch Enchanter, which gives us our 3rd land drop, which is really nice. And our opponent lands a Psychic Rock, which is very scary. Drawing another Solitude was nice. If I had double white, I would have Skyclave the Psychic Frog. Without it, Recruitering for Phelia with a Vial on 2 feels fine, and we are going to have to pitch cast Solitude to get rid of the Psychic Frog, because we just can't afford for our opponent to be getting value out of the Psychic Frog this early. They do have an Unearth for an Oculus. I choose not to Solitude it here. The reasoning is that if you pitch cast a Solitude, and then with it on the stack, you can even interrupt the Solitude to then cast it from plot, to basically scam the Solitude and keep it in play. Unfortunately, I haven't drawn white cards to let that play happen, and this Oculus is going to get away with the game, so I do need to deal with it before it makes too many manifests. And here our opponent has a second Oculus, which is insanely scary, and we absolutely have to deal with it right away. And this is one of the downsides of Fatal Push, is that it doesn't cleanly kill Oculus. But thankfully, pitch casting Solitude does turn on Revolt, so we can use the push to kill the second Oculus. And here we're in a tough spot. Our opponent's still got a few cards in hand. We're in top deck mode. Macabre's not doing anything right now, and our opponent's just getting free value off the Oculus. So I draw Recruiter the Guard here, which is really nice. So here we vial in the Recruiter, we shoot it for Emperor of Bones. Our opponent uses the Trespasser to get rid of our Phelia. We are on 1 life, so this is where it starts getting scary, like insane if we're able to possibly survive this game. We ticked the Vial up 4 to start looking at getting towards Solitude Vial, which means this Fairy Macabre should have been put into play at some point during this game. We do get a Solitude back, which gets rid of the Oculus, gains us a bit of life back, so we're looking okay now. Our opponent has a second Graveyard Trespasser, which puts our life total in a very bad spot. I did use the Fairy Macabre to get rid of the cards I was targeting with Trespasser, so they didn't make us lose some life. Here again with the Overlord, because I'm hoping to hit Solitude, which we do. The Vial's on 5, so Solitude's looking pretty reasonable. Our opponent attacks all that. They exile a bunch of stuff, but it's pretty low. Here's where I messed up. I moved to the Declare Blocker step because Moto Brain. I should have vialed in Solitude before the Declare Blockers so that I could use it as a block. Get rid of a Manifest, block a bunch, take 2 down to 1, flash in Phelia with the intent of flickering the Solitude, which is a reason to not blocked with it, but we've got the Overlord as well, so we're going to be able to rebuy Solitude. So just a misplay on my part. Our opponent has Sink into Super for my Overlord, which is fine. The Vial's on 5, so I can still vial it in. It just stops them from being able to attack with it this turn. But I will attack with Phelia and blink the Solitude to get rid of this Graveyard Trespasser. And I did choose to vial in the Overlord in my main phase so I could cast the Recruiter to get a Phelia just as insurance, which I don't even know that Phelia was the right choice there. But my opponent ends up having the Unearth to get the Graveyard Trespasser back, which the ETB will kill me because I have ended up on 1 life again. So let's go on to game number 3. Going into the 3rd and final game against Dimir Frog, I realized pretty quick that I do want 4 copies of Aether Vial against them, so I chose to just kind of undo some of my sideboarding, put the Vial, the Phelia, and the Ephemerate back in. Ephemerate's good against removal, Phelia's got Flash, so it has value there. And I've just chosen to cut the Thought Seizers again. Because it's such a fair matchup, Thought Seize is like just trying to kind of clear the way for you to resolve a Phelia or something. It's not huge impact, so not 100% sure with this sideboarding still. Let me know in the comments if you have a good sideboard plan for this matchup, because it's something I'm still trying to work out. So this is what I'm going with for game number 3. Let's get into it. Game number 3, we're on the play. We have to mulligan this no-land 7. We'll keep a 6, put back a second Aven Interrupter, and this hand is leaning pretty hard on Phelia into Recruiter, but we're not going to 5 in this matchup, so good enough. Our opponent jams Nihil Spellbomb, which isn't that scary for us, so Flash and Phelia, hope they don't have removal. They have removal. We untap. Miss our third land drop, but we do have Solitude's game available, which isn't nothing. There's also points in this game where I considered Surgical and Fatal Push, but ultimately I want to save the front. Okay, we draw Balemurk, so we could get punished by a counterspell here, but we choose to just jam. We choose Phelia. We're missing land drops, so Emperor Bones isn't going to do anything for a while, and we can always get it back later, potentially. And our opponent takes this opportunity to just Nihil Spellbomb and get rid of our small graveyard. We do have a second Overlord in there, so there is the scary part of potentially I get it back with Emperor Bones later on in the game if it goes long enough. Our opponent has a Thought Scaler, which lets them put their Oculus into play, which is really scary. So I could end up with Solitude Scam. The reason I chose to just jam Solitude here is partly because I have the Overlord ticking up, and partly because I'm just worried, like, if I Solitude Scam, like, if my opponent has counter spells or removal or whatever, I'm just playing into it, so I decided to just jam it, and here we're just trading card for card. And our opponent tries to unearth the Oculus, and I choose to Surgical it, so that takes a lot of their threats out of their deck. So I actually feel like that's a pretty solid play and puts us in a pretty reasonable spot. Here I'm just choosing to hold up Phelia. There was a thought to recruit a hold up Ephemerate. I also could have recruiter gotten a land to still be able to hold up Phelia, but I chose to just hold up Phelia and just chill and just take my time, because worst case this Overlord's getting online pretty soon after. Play out the Phelia, which kind of feels like it's a must answer for our opponent. I play the recruiter just in case we need it, and our opponent has the bush. I choose to Ephemerate here, which I think I should have just let Phelia die. The Overlord's coming off impending soon anyway. I don't know that I actually needed to protect the Phelia. Like, it's just going to get recruiter value, and I've got a recruiter in hand, so that was probably a very unnecessary Ephemerate there. But the thought was that the Ephemerate will rebound and flicker the recruiter, and I'll get value off it there anyway, so that seemed pretty good. Except our opponent has the Toxic Deluge, which punishes the fact that our Overlord just became a creature. So they get an illusion token off of our Skyclave Apparition, and here I just jam recruiter. I've got access to another Ephemerate. I choose to get Phelia because I'm hoping my opponents run out of all the interaction they've had, and that maybe I can start getting value off of Phelia. Because if we can start doing that, we start winning the game, I think. Here's where we look a little punished, the Concealed Courtyard. If that was untapped, that could have been a hardcast Solitude we'd be holding open. We do also have Solitude Scam available, but we're just going to jam Phelia here, again, hoping our opponent's finally running out of removal. Nope, they've got Fatal Push, and again I choose to Ephemerate, and they just have another Fatal Push. So if I'd Surgical the Fatal Push, maybe that would have paid off there, but, you know, getting rid of the Oculus has also seemed good. Because I wasted the Ephemerate, now I hardcast Solitude, and because I drew a land, I would have had Ephemerate available, so again, that looks bad. I Sorcery Speed the Solitude because I'm worried about my opponent having counterspells, which means I just get punished by this Sorcery Speed removal in Meathook Massacre that gets to take out my Solitude free. And here we're just top decking lands, so I have no idea why I chose not to cast the Witch Enchanter last set. It would have just blown up the Meathook Massacre for free, so probably would have been fine. Here, Fairy Macabre is just going to be a chump blocker to try and keep the Psychic Frog from drawing cards. And it seems like our opponent wants to keep their cards. They're not discarding to make the Psychic Frog able to attack past the Fairy Macabre, which is a pretty scary prospect. Top deck a land. We Witch Enchanter to blow up the Meathook Massacre and just pass back. Again, we just need our opponent to not draw cards off this Psychic Frog. It seems like they finally drew a card they weren't happy with, so here they're going to force me to just lose my Fairy Macabre so that in future turns their frog starts getting through. I kept the Boggart Trawler on top here, plan being that if I Boggart Troll their graveyard, it makes their Psychic Frog not be able to fly, which gives me, you know, 2 chump blockers. So it potentially gives me the option here of they attack. If they want to attack, I can double block and they have to pitch their whole hand to get past. But my opponent here cycles Unearth, cracks Polluted Delta, plays a Flooded Strand, cracks that as well. And those are 3 cards in graveyard that need to give Psychic Frog flying, which it seems like it hits another Psychic Frog. So I am in big danger here, and my top decks have been less than great considering how much value our deck has in its top decks, and our opponent's just top deck better. So we ultimately lose here to this Psychic Frog just becoming lethal by discarding their whole hand. That's alright, this is one of our best matchups, so losing to it is a good learning experience to find out what not to do in the matchup, but we're still 3-1, so let's go on and see what happens in match number 5. Alright, the 5th and final match in the league, currently 3-1. And we are versing Hammer Time. Our opponent has a pretty explosive start. We've kept a 7 that's, you know, what we want in a turn 2 Overlord into a turn 3 Flickerwisp. Because the matchup's really great that we get to hold up turn 1 Fatal Push and or Pitchcast Solitude. Our opponent has the Pure Steel. We get to Fatal Push in response to them trying to equip the Colossus Hammer to it. And here we're impending the Overlord. as we were kind of already planning to do. We get Recruit of the Guard, which could be value for later in the game. When we get there, we pitch cast Solitude to them trying to equip the Pure Steel Paladin again. Yeah, and here's where it gets really gross. We're going to Flickerwisp the Witch Blessed Meadow, blow up our opponent's hammer, leave them with one land and a Mox Opal that no longer works, and just put us really far ahead. So that was game number one. Let's go to sideboard. So sideboarding against Hammer, this is where we're going to bring in our Affinity Hate package of 3 Wrath the Skies, 1 Kataki, 2 Stony. Kataki hasn't always been its best against Hammer, but now they're a Mox Opal deck, they're going to keep artifacts in play. So bring in all of these, bring in a White Orchid Phantom to kill Urza Saga, maybe overkill because we have the Wrath the Skies, but I decided to make this call. You could actually end up cutting all the White Orchid Phantoms, I'm not sure which is correct. And I brought in 2 Surgicals, which again I'm not sure of. Like if we could Surgical a Hammer it seems okay, or Surgical a Saga means that they can't fight us on a mid-range plan, so if we can stop their kind of combo-y plan, we might have an advantage. I think looking back, maybe I want to bring in the Thoughtseize, but not sure. This is what I've decided to go with for this game. And in trimming, I've cut the 4 Aether Vials because again, bringing Stonies and Wraths, this was kind of always our plan, was the Vials are going to get much worse, but these cards are really, really, really good. 3 Emperor of Bones, the only utility this is going to get is kind of recurring Solitudes to users repeated removal. It's just kind of slow. This is also why I've trimmed the one of Aven. If we draw it, fine, but it's still going to mean holding up our mana to like slow our opponent's spell down a turn. We're not really ever going to tutor for it because again, that's a very slow play. So kind of trying to make sure we get in under them because if the game goes long, we're going to win regardless. And trimming a Phelia, the reasoning for doing it in this matchup is just that often she will attack and just get eaten. So, you know, we kind of still like having access to them so that we can flip our Overlord into a 5/5 as quick as possible. But this isn't a matchup where she's going to stick around and get heaps of repeated value. So we have chosen to trim one. Okay, game number 2, we've got Solitude's game, we've got Overlord. Pretty happy with this. Especially happy that our opponent mulligans to 5. That is crazy good for us. Our opponent just leads Urza Saga Springleaf Drum. We're just going to play Fetch Land and play a Surveil Land if that's all we need to do. Our opponent jams 2 Ornithopters, so end step, I'm just going to Solitude Scam and get rid of both Ornithopters, which leaves our opponent with not many choices. They have 1 card left in hand, and it seemed like their plan was probably just to try and win off this Urza Saga or at least lead with it. So they make the Constructs, but that means that when our Ephemerate rebounds, we just get rid of the Construct token. And here we draw Failure, which I could have played Overlord, but again, Failure into Overlord is just a really strong play. So Failure's going to flicker the Solitude and get rid of any creatures they might want to play. They get a Stoneforge, shoot it for a Colossus Hammer, and we're just going to flash in Failure and threaten to Solitude the Stoneforge as well. And our opponent scoops it up there. For what it's worth, I was actually spent some time in this game trying to work out if I was meant to Surgical the Urza Saga so that our opponent couldn't start coming back in a meaningful way by playing like a mid-range plan, but it didn't end up mattering because we just had a very easy way to shut up our opponent's entire game plan. So that was match number 5, 4-1 in the league. Pretty happy with that. Let's go to the post-league wrap-up. Okay, so overall, a 4-1 league. Pretty good, and I don't know if you're keeping track, but all of our wins were 2-0s, and our one loss was a 1-2, which, Dimir Frog is one of this deck's best matchups. So losing that matchup, as bad as it is that we lost a good matchup, like it makes me feel pretty good about how this deck list went and how I went piloting it because we did get a pretty good result overall. As far as the deck list, looking at the mana base, there were times where Concealed Courtyard was a tap land where I would have rather was untapped so I would have a better play, but it didn't really leave me with no plays. In this league, I didn't get punished for not having as much black mana as I needed. So the Flagstones didn't really feel like a punish. Everything else felt kind of great. It's just, yeah, the Concealed Courtyard is the one that I still need to keep testing and working out. But so far, these 8 lands haven't really punished me. So, and I do like the cleanness of it, just having all these fast lands and all these Flagstones work with our Phantoms. As far as the main deck stuff, kind of loved everything. Like the Overlords formed really well. Emperor of Bones was, I feel like, an MVP in this league. The more I play with this card, the more I love it. Really, really cool. The Aven was good. Wisps are good. I wouldn't really want a 4th, I don't think. If we had the room, then yeah, we could put it in, but the Skyclave was a nice one-of option. Ideally, I would cut this card. Like, I don't actually love it so much in the main deck as that one-of, like, it does feel clunky, but having it as a tutor target, like, if I could, you know, have this in my sideboard and shoot it out there with Recruiter, I would absolutely do that, but it's kind of, I just have to run it main deck to have that effect, and I'm kind of just okay with that. And the sideboard, Kataki was a good tutor target. There are times where if I had have drawn it, it'll been random tutor for it would have done really well. Rats seemed really good, did well, definitely looked like a good option. Everything in the sideboard kind of looked great. Like, I love having the option of bringing in Aven post board. There is maybe the consideration of like against the fair decks where I'm just like, oh, I'll tag a counterspell. Maybe I just leave them in the board and just have the one main as a tutor target. Maybe they just come in for like combo decks that are using X spells or whatever. Maybe that's what Aven's job in the sideboard is. I'm not sure. I did like the 4th Phantom in the 75. I ideally would have this main. Like, ideally the Skyclave would just go away and I would have a 4th Phantom in the main. But I just don't think that's feasible. I think you want this flexibility and just make sure to have this in the 75. Like, a lot of lists are just running like 3 to 4 Phantoms in the sideboard and none main. I'm happier kind of running it this way. Thoughtseize, very good card. Happy to have it here. Surgical, very strong card. Happy to have in this meta. Fairy, great card. Love this card. I think maybe I just need to learn how to use it better, but this is a very good card. Stony, I think Stony is a card that would get me out of a lot of jams. There are times where I've played this deck in other matches, like testing in friendly leagues and stuff, where Stony's just kind of sat there and my opponents eventually answered it and done stuff and I haven't been able to like put pressure on them. But the downside of turning a Vial is interesting. Like, it's not gonna like, you're not gonna resolve this and just win a match all the time. You know, there's times you're going to resolve it and you're going to sit there and your opponent's eventually going to find an answer for it and then just pop off in the turn they do it. So turning off Aether Vial is a real cost. So this is a spot where I might want to consider other options. I think the affinity matchup should actually be pretty okay. Otherwise, the one scary thing is Kappa Cannoneer is very hard for us to deal with. So we're not going to race under it. So we just need to kind of kill it with Solitude and pay the 4, which is tough. So ideally, like, this could be another card. Like, I think the Breach matchup is one of our tougher matchups. So something to fight that, like some kind of Storm Hate could be consideration. Otherwise, I really liked what the 75 was doing. I think as a baseline, this is a really, really good place to start. A lot of the numbers, kind of the inspiration for having so many 3Ls is that there are 80 card lists that look really good that get to run 4 of these mains. So I kind of just went with that and went, you know, running 4 copies in an 80 is the same as running 3 cards in a 60. So I went with those ratios and went, these are the cards that, you know, would be 4-ofs in an 80 card build. But the downside is that you lose access to Phelia and Balemurk and Solitude and Recruiter as reliably, and Aether Vial, especially Aether Vial. So the idea is that by condensing down to 60 with the 3-ofs, that we're going to find these as consistently as possible, and we're going to find these at the consistency we would if there were 4 cards in 80. For a 60, I think this is nice. If you're interested in the deck, I would consider finding those 80 card lists and looking over those, because I think they might actually be the way to go. But with that said, that is this list. I have a mono white list that I might play at some point. This is what I'm looking at for the upcoming RC that I'm qualified for. So if you're going to an RC, this is, I think, the list you should be looking at for the next month or two. It might evolve some more in the meantime, but for now, this is Taxes. I think this is what Taxes looks like currently, because, you know, we've played Taxes for a while. We played mono white and kind of done whatever we wanted with it, and we've had fun, but it hasn't been meta. Like, it's just been like, I know Taxes and I feel like I play Taxes well, so I play it and I do okay with it because I'm a Taxes player. This is Taxes in the current modern meta. This is a competitor, which Taxes hasn't been since Zendikar Rising, where we got Skyclave Apparition on Archon of Emiria that fought that current meta really, really well, and Taxes was like a tier 2 deck, which is what it is again with this build, running Overlord and Emperor of Bones and a Black Splash. So if you're a Taxes fan, check this list out and definitely give it some reps. Maybe try the 80 card list and let me know how that compares and how you like it compared to the 60. But with that said, this is Modern Death and Taxes. So thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye-zy.